When we vote for president, we're not actually technically directly voting for president. We're casting our vote for president, definitely. But what ultimately happens is our vote is then translated into Electoral College outcomes. What do I mean by that? Well, the Electoral College is this weird mixture of individual and state power, basically, in picking our president. So when the Constitution was drafted, remember there were a lot of states' rights advocates who were involved in this, and they wanted states to have some say in this process. So states ultimately get to decide how their electors will vote in the Electoral College. Oops, sorry about that. And in this case, what has happened for 48 out of 50 states is the states have decided that they will have their electors vote for the popular vote winner in the state. So whoever wins the popular vote within New York State, not nationally, just within the state, will get New York State's 28 Electoral College votes. And that's how 48 out of 50 states do it. So, it's a pretty common method. Now, this has led to some weird results from time to time because the Electoral College votes are based off of the number of representatives and the number of senators. So I said New York has 28 Electoral College votes. That's because we have 26 seats in the House plus 2 senators. So total of 28 votes in the Electoral College. Now, smaller, more rural states with lower populations actually have a slightly louder voice in the Electoral College. And this makes sense if we think about it, because we know that the Senate was created to protect smaller states, right? It was part of the Great Compromise that was to get smaller states on board and say, hey, small states, you'll still have an equal say to larger states. Now, in the House, things are allocated proportionally. So that still gives larger states more of a say in the Electoral College vote by sheer numbers, but it gives the smaller states just a little bit more power because those 2 senators in there inflate the voice of the smaller states just a little bit. And this has led to occasional mismatches where the popular vote winner nationally does not match the Electoral College vote winner. So there's some recent cases of that, including President Trump back in 2016 and President George W. Bush back in 2000. Both of those presidents did not win the popular vote, but did win the Electoral College vote. Now, George W. Bush did ultimately win the popular vote when he was reelected in 2004, but in the original 2000 election, he won the Electoral College vote, but lost the popular vote. That was basically because of the power of these smaller states, these more rural states, and their slightly louder voice in the Electoral College because of those 2 senators. Now, talking about the Electoral College, we often talk about things in terms of blue states and red states. Blue states are Democratic, red states are Republican. And we use this blue state, red state basically because of the 2000 election. That election took so long to get decided that we kept seeing these Electoral College maps, and the color coding stuck with Republicans as red and Democrats as blue. If you're from another country, this might be a little confusing because in many other countries, the more liberal party is color-coded red. For example, in England, the Labour Party, which is the more liberal of the 2 main parties, actually uses red as their main color. So if that's a little confusing for you because you're from a country where that's happened, we know we can blame the 2000 election for it. People just got used to seeing these colors associated with these parties, and it stuck. Now, when we get used to seeing this, we also get used to seeing these maps, like the one we're seeing the sort of normal red-blue divide map. For me, it's in the top left. I hope it is for you. I know Zoom sometimes flips things around a bit. But in that regular sort of map, we can see that it makes it look like the US is pretty polarized, right? That there's like big clumps of red and then these sort of coastal areas of blue and then a couple smattering of blue in the middle. But it seems like we're pretty geographically polarized. That there are red states and there are blue states. If you live in New York, you're probably a Democrat. If you live in Texas, you're probably Republican. But that's not entirely an accurate view of things. Because as it turns out, actually, there's a lot of Republicans in New York and there's a lot of Democrats in Texas. It's just because ultimately the popular vote in those states goes Democrat and for the Democratic candidate for president in New York and for the Republican presidential candidate in Texas. We see them as fully blue and fully red. But as you can see in the next map over, right next to our sort of standard map, these sort of shades of purpley, some are blue or purple, some are red or purple, but everything looks sort of mixed in purple. There are, again, darker blue areas and darker red areas, but look how much more blending there is. That's when the same map, the same election results are done with shading based on proportion of the vote won, done by district rather than statewide. And so we can see that New York certainly looks strongly blue in the New York City area, but actually has big swaths of red throughout in upstate and western New York. Texas is very red in sort of central and northern Texas, but along the border, it's actually quite blue. So another way that this sort of distorts things is we sort of see these big swaths of red in the middle and think, wow, the country is like really Republican. But that's because some of these states in the middle are geographically really big, but have very small populations. For example, Wyoming looks really gigantic, but in reality, it has a lower population than the average congressional district. And that's the entire state, has fewer people than the average congressional district in other states. So this map on the bottom left is distorting our sort of geographic representation of the US and shrinking the lower population states and stretching the larger population states to make the area on the map proportional to the population rather than to the geographic area. So we can see that the country is not quite as large swaths of red as it looked. Now, if we do the same thing to our shaded map, we again see this really mix and blending of the different parties. So the Electoral College can really distort how we perceive the distribution of opinions and voters and the sort of distort how we perceive what our country is in terms of political makeup. We often hear about polarization. Is the country as polarized as it looks in that sort of original depiction? Maybe not, at least if we look at those two different shaded ones. So keep that in mind. When we talk about the Electoral College, it's really a product of those compromises that went into making the Constitution and may not be as perfectly representative of our country as we kind of often think it is.